You ready? Okay, we're starting a little late. Looks like about 4 minutes after 2. Finance Committee special agenda on Tuesday, the 23rd of August. I'll call to order. Are there any public questions or comments? Seeing, hearing none, we'll step into item number 3, rate study. I guess this will be a community discussion. Stan has been compiling some notes, I understand, to help lead part of this discussion. Last time we met, we talked about a number of options that we'd like to be able to consider as we step into the next rate study. Do you guys have copies of what Stan had the last time, or Stan, do you have new copies? So part. So this capital improvement plan priorities is the result of looking at the list that Krieger and Stewart gave us, and then taking items number 1, 2, 3, and 6, I think was the one, because I think the guidance we got from staff was if we do numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the list that Don had, that we didn't need to worry about item number 5.
I don't want to say you don't have to worry about it. I'm saying that items 1, 2, and 3 would help to alleviate the issues that would go with number 5.
Okay, and then doing number 6 instead of number 5 with those first 3. I guess there's 125K, a little booster thing in there as well, I guess, that we would try to figure out how to do as well, but it wasn't big enough to worry about the bottom line number on the investment for CIP in the first phase of the next rate study. Okay, so that's what Stan has collected here, I think. I just wanted to verify that those were the proper priorities.
There was a lot of discussion about priorities in the last briefing that I presented. The capital investment priorities were a critical issue. Not that the board is all that concerned about specifically what they are. It was, we have to know how much money we need. And so I think at the last board meeting, this is what we resolved. And so hopefully we're not going to belabor this any further. We're looking for $9.4 million. And so that's sort of the end of that story. And the other issue that I think was resolved at the last board meeting was we're not going to go into any more discussion on the pay-as-you-go. We're going to bond for $9.4 million.
So and we had some discussion about that. I think there's still a desire to perhaps see the report that Mark put together that had a bond option versus
Well, not just that, I think that,
cash.
isn't there you want to set the rates at the bond, but see if there's other options out there as well, right?
So we have a cash pay-as-you-go option right now.
I know, but I'm saying that when you're looking at the setting the rates, worst case scenario would be that we take a bond out on it. Best case scenario is we find other options for borrowing the money.
Yes, so you might see on page 2, Stan, we talked last time about the SRF as a potential way to get lower cost money, but also recognize that if we're going to do a rate study, we need to think about worst case, which is, I think Mark has already done at a 4.3% bond rate if we had to go finance. And so I think that's the way that we need to go for is, do a bond, do this as a debt service approach with that assumption of 4.3%. And I don't know, Mark might have a different number now, given that the Fed keeps messing with the rates. Maybe that's gone up on us. But at the same time, so that would be, as Stan kind of highlighted here, that would be the phase one. So that would get the first $9.4 million. The other CIP projects that are still important to do, but not necessarily right away, could be addressed in a second bond that we would incur perhaps in 27 or later.
Right, the second phase would be in the following rate study.
Could be in the next rate study.
Yeah,
But if we get started early enough on that, we might find that we can actually qualify for an SRF bond issue, or whatever they call it,
right.
option.
Those are typically project specific, but yes. I don't think we could package it all into one issuance with SRF, but yeah, that's something we would submit projects to SRF, see if they qualify, see if they approve us. If not, then maybe we'd look at the bond option.
Okay, well, that's,
Well, it does make a difference if we're going to include a second phase, because it means the first phase is only going to require, $600,000 a year in terms of additional debt service. And the way it's stated in here now, not that it can't be changed, at this point in time, the other $600,000 of what is, I've stated as a $1.2 million debt service increase, if we don't plan on doing that, you know, in the 26 timeframe, or 27 timeframe, then we don't need to build up the extra revenue to ensure that we've got the money to pay that debt service. So the timing is important. And if we can not raise the debt payment ceiling, that extra $600,000, that would be helpful in terms of not raising additional rates. So we do need to decide the timing on that second phase. And if you think we can push that off a couple more years, then we can push off some of the increased rates a couple more years. So we probably need to resolve that thing. Not that it make a tremendous amount of difference, but, you know, every 1 or 2% increase in rates, I'm sure the public's going to be interested in.
Right, the projects we have in here would cover us for the next 5 years.
Yes, and then the question is, do we want to assume that the next project is going to be in the first year of the next phase? And if it's not, then we can reduce our revenue demand, is what I'm saying. Because, you know, right now, we can cover that $9.4 million increase with something in the area of a $600,000 increase in debt service. And if we're not looking at moving on in the 27, I'm going to get this any minute now. FY 27 is what I assume to hear is the second phase, which means that we would have to have built up the revenue to pay off that debt service by 27. And if we don't need to until 20, that gives us an extra year or two to increase rates to pay the debt service, if you see what I'm saying. So the timing of the second phase is important. I mean, I'm not saying it's important by, you know, multiple percent of rate increases, but it is going to make an impact.
So the only debt service would put into the 5-year rate study would just be that to cover that $9.4 million. I don't think we would be anticipating a debt service higher than what's required for that 9.4 during this 5-year term. Because I know you were talking about going up to 1.
I'm not going to try to talk you into raising the rates.
Right.
So I'm happy
Yeah.
with going along with only being concerned about a $600,000 or $700,000 increase in debt service.
Yeah, right. So if we were to bond for the second phase, that would be something that would incorporate into the future rate study,
Okay.
not within the current one.
That's actually good news.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good news. We were trying to, think about that entire list that Krieger and Stewart gave us, and is that something we would need to be thinking about during this rate study? It sounds like we don't, so that's,
Yeah.
Right, so like, we'd approve a 5-year rate plan, and then in year 4 is when we'd start looking at this again and projecting out what are our future needs
okay.
according to that list.
And that may be the stuff that's on Krieger and Stewart's list that we haven't addressed, or it might be a new set of stuff we don't know yet, so. Awesome.
Well,
Do we have,
most of the things on that list, 1 through 6, are gonna be in this 9.4, except for number 5. And number 5, I think, is something that we will definitely have to be included in the next phase,
okay,
because it's operational. It's something that we need to make sure that the system is working out, it's designed to work. The other things from 7 down are well replacements, and those are something that we're gonna have to ascertain at the moment.
Well, it turns out there were a couple in there for 125,000 that might fit into the cash capital, but we need to start working that issue. But the other thing I want to make sure everybody understands is, right now the timing is that we not bond until mid FY '24. And the reason for that is that gives us an opportunity to perhaps get involved with a state revolving fund. We can't guarantee, since we don't know enough about the state revolving fund, that we're going to have the 2 or 2.5% interest rates. That's why we've said 4.3. We're going to budget for worst case. But that doesn't mean we want to spend 4.3% on a bond when we can get a 2% interest rate from the state. So we do need to start looking into that aspect of it.
yeah, the potential downside to that, though, of course, looking at what's going on with interest rate and the Fed's interactions with, 4.3 might be a
Yeah,
distant
4.3.
memory,
Yeah, 4.3 is today's rate.
right?
Yeah.
And we know things are going up. I mean, the Fed's talking about another 75 basis points, and we'll probably find that out in just a few weeks, right? So 4.3 won't necessarily stand.
Who knows? But it's the only number we have right now. So
But
that's why
2
I use
years
it.
from now,
But-
I agree, but if we base
Yeah.
our rate study on 4.3 and then we don't
Yeah.
bond until 2 years from now, we may not be able to get 4.3.
Right, but if we're no longer worried about being ready, financial ready for phase 2 during these 5 years, that takes a little bit of the monkey off of our back. And the other thing is I appreciate the fact that the interest rates are going up, but the state revolving fund is not really a loan. It's basically money that the state and the federal government have taken from us, and they're giving back to us with some strings attached. And so the highest interest rate that the state revolving fund has had, where some of that money is actually contributed by the feds, who also took our money. I mean, let's face it, it's not just the state that's taking our money. The highest it's been over the last 22 years is 2.6%. So, I agree, it's not a given, and it might be considered what you call a long shot, but if we can get 2.6 or that ballpark interest rate, it's something we absolutely have to go and look at before we commit to a 4.3 or a 4.5 or, God forbid, a 5.0 interest rate.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing that option in time happening in such a way that we're going to be able to wait until we get an okay from the SRF that we're going to get a lower rate.
Oh,
And
well,
then
yeah, I
decide,
mean-
right? Because we're going to need to decide
We're going to use
now,
the bond rate for the budget,
right?
but when push comes to shove, I don't want to actually
Gotcha.
actually commit to a 4.3 or higher bond, if indeed in the meantime we can figure out what we're doing and get a lower.
We're on the same page.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. A question on the debt service ratio that you present to us every month. How's this going to impact that? Are we okay, or we have room if we assume more debt service?
So if we assume more debt service, of course, that's gonna assume more revenue, which would be the offset to make sure we have the debt service coverage ratio. That
Is
we-
it dollar for dollar, or is it a?
No, it's a formula with operational revenues less operational expenditures, and then whatever's left over has to be 20% higher than the debt service.
Okay.
So it's not quite one for one, but we'll make sure we stay within that.
Okay, and so this doesn't worry you?
No,
overly?
because realistically, we can't even issue bonds if we don't meet a debt service coverage ratio.
That's something that they'll have to factor into the
Yeah.
cost of service.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yep.
that'll all be part of it.
all right. Any other comments on this page 2, Stan, or staff?
No, I think, I'm very pleased, actually, that, knowing that phase 2 is, doesn't have to be a heavy part of this, because that actually means that we don't need to increase rates to cover a $1.2 million increase in the debt service. It's going to be somewhere between, 600,000 and probably, hopefully, no more than 700,000 max. And it could be significantly less, but we can't count on it. That's the whole problem.
So given that, is that a sufficient reason for us to pause a little bit and think about project number 5 and include that in the 9.4? You mentioned time.
I just
that-
can't see us being able to build all those projects in that time frame.
Okay,
It's just too many projects.
all right, so we're okay by
Yes.
deferring that, but making sure it's up on the short list for the next rate cycle?
Correct.
Okay. We're hoping some of this information is getting to Mark, but that's something we need to be keeping in mind here, is that he needs to know kind of where we're thinking. And
That's what we're waiting for, so we have clear defined scenarios, so we can say, this is what we're looking at.
Okay.
Then he can give us the official proposal, and we can kick it off and
Okay,
start going.
awesome. Thanks for that. And don't assume I understand all that, right? Just keep me on track if we forget about something, because we want to make sure we've got everything in here that we need to. And there's a few things that are concerning us about the future, and one of them is trying to anticipate what the water use is going to be in the valley with all these ABs coming out of the state, and the GA fees. And people are starting probably now to start really, I mean, initially when you start to see your water rates go up, you don't immediately go out and fix your yard to make, for less demand, because it can be expensive. I've noticed lots of dead trees around the area that may be reflection on people just saying the hell with it and turning off their sprinklers, a lot of my neighborhood. So we're going to start seeing multiple effects on the water usages, I think, develop during this rate cycle. And so we're asking Dawn to help us understand, give us some method that we could estimate numbers of usage so we can define what tier 1 rates are. If we use the 55 gallon, I'm not too sure we want to be as bullish to use the 42 gallon guideline, but if we start with the 55 and then some sort of estimate of outdoor usages, which I know is hard to come up with because we don't monitor that, but maybe it's just a percentage decline. We anticipate a 20% reduction. Whatever, we just need a stake in the ground that says, okay, this is what we're going to use. I know it's an assumption, but here's how we came to that assumption. Is something we can present to the public and get their buy-in and say, oh, okay, now we understand why you had to do that to adjust the tier levels is coming our way. And we'll need to have something for Mark to work, of course, as he does his next phase of work for us. You want to speak to the capital investment cap that you've mentioned here, Stan? I'm not too sure I can articulate what the desire is and Do we have an estimate?
Mel, what page are you on?
So this
Are
is the
you-
top-level strategy, yearly cash capital investment to be capped at XXX million per year. Do we have are we looking for staff to provide a recommendation of what we think XXX million should be, or is this a discussion item that you'd like to bring up today? Am I mumbling?
Well, actually, I think you're not standing close enough to your mic.
Okay. I do that when I shave too. If I don't get close enough to the mirror, it ends up leaving stubble. So I'll try to stop stubbling here. So on the top level strategy chart, you have a line item for yearly cash capital investment to be capped at XXX million. Are we looking for staff to recommend XXX, or did you want to just discuss that today? Or do you have a desired number, what XXX means, XXX means?
Yes, we absolutely need, because previously we threw all the cash capital together. And in the past, we, had a separate yearly cash capital, a budget that's included in the budget, and then we have the, long-term capital. So yes, we need to have a, cash capital, all the things that you can, if it only lasts for 5 or 10 years, and especially if it costs less than $100,000 or $200,000, we need to include, vehicles are probably one of the best, best things. They only last, in theory, 5 or 6, 7 years, and it costs $60,000, $70,000. You know what I mean? We've always had.
We've got vehicles, we've got computer replacements, we do have some of the laterals and main lines that we go through and we have to replace. Right now, we're replacing meters, of course, to bring them up to within the useful life. Main lines are probably the main lines, and the lateral replacements are the street repairs are big ones, yeah.
Of course, if it's a main line and it lasts for 30 years or more, it almost might be better to bundle in with the next group of capital investments.
So they're smaller main lines, and they're the mostly laterals that we're replacing. They were talking about a 300-foot main line that's going from 4-inch to 8-inch.
Okay, well,
which wouldn't qualify for
I guess
bonding.
go ahead and put, whatever you think is right, go ahead and put it in, and then we'll have a discussion next week on, does it fit, or not.
Yeah, because I think we've typically been probably around 2 million with all of that stuff every year, just for street repairs.
Well, what we'd like to do is see over, what are the expenses we would expect to, not necessarily over 5 years. That would be, kind of excessive, but, examples of, this is typically what we spend per year, and it is going to be going on that way for the next 5 years.
What have we been doing in recent history?
Like I said, it's been about 2 million
About 2.
between replacements, repairs, and the equipment.
Yeah.
Okay,
think
maybe a reasonable starting point might be just to think about inflationary impact over the period of time and adjust that as a starting point.
I think I looked at the last 2 years. I looked at the July finance reports, and they were like 1.5 and 1.8. But again, it's got to be, if it lasts 50 years and it's more than $100,000, then we need to consider putting it into the doesn't mean we're going to, but.
Yeah, the issue with the $100,000 projects is they just don't get to a point where the bondholders want to see big projects.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
Well, that's why you would bundle it, but don't worry about that now. Put it together and let's talk about it after you had a chance to look at it.
And our reserves right now are around 10, is that what I recall? I think that's a reasonable number. We're not thinking we need larger reserves than $10 million.
Well, for the policy, of course, you've got your emergency reserve, which is 6 months of your operating revenue. That comes in around about 5 million.
Okay,
We are working on the the capital replacement emergency fund, which is for 1 booster station, 1 well, and 1 reservoir. And that, I think we said was around 10 million. That's what we'd like to get to. So if you had those 3 catastrophic failures in 1 year, you have the money to replace it. 350,000, I think, is our vehicle reserve. 100,000 is our computer reserve. Then we have the future source of supply. I think it's sitting around 2.5 million.
and in the year of the earthquake, how much of our reserve did we use? And thankfully we had it, but how much reserve did we?
I don't believe we used, I think we were able to do cash fund, those items that weren't covered by Cal OSHA.
Okay,
And we used, some of the COP money for the booster station.
but we were able to respond immediately because we had the reserve. We didn't have to wait for Cal to come in with their,
Right, we were
Approval.
able to float it until we got, reserves, but, reimbursed.
Yeah, but we weren't reimbursed for everything though, right?
But
We-
25% we had to cover.
We paid cash capital for some of that, but it wasn't so much that the budget didn't cover it, so you can't, I don't think, it didn't impact the reserve level because we had extra money in the budget that year,
There was some capital projects we pushed out. That's how we covered it.
you know.
okay.
But we're in good shape in terms of reserve. We just haven't yet met all the desirements that we put into our original list for reserves.
Right, we've got minimum, we got more than minimum, we're just not at optimal.
Okay. All right. So is there do we need to have a discussion about increasing the amount that we currently have in reserves? Is that what I'm hearing, or?
That could be part of it. I mean, we would like, I don't think within 5 years we would get to that point of where we want to be for our emergency capital reserve. But I think it's something we should look at increasing so that we can cover more than we currently can if there is that catastrophic failure.
Okay.
Yeah, the primary reason why this is in there is that the original plan that was put out by Mark had us using our reserves for doing the pay-as-you-go. And I want to make sure everybody understands that our reserves are they're almost all emergency reserves, and we use them when we need to, but we're not going to voluntarily use them for capital expenditures. So Mark needs to understand that, dipping into it a little bit, temporarily for a year or two, meaning like $1 million or $2 million, but not the 6 or 8 million that was in that report, because we might need that.
Yeah, I think the message that we're going to go with debt service will be clear to Mark that, that reserve is off limits, but
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as you go, I'm assuming you talk with him constantly and make sure he understands what we're doing.
Right.
Because we don't want to surprise him any more than we want him to surprise us.
Right, yeah.
All right? It's 2 ways. Sorry about that, Jason. When you get old, you get awkward, and that's really the bottom line. You wouldn't know that yet, but it will.
How'd you
happen
get
sooner than
it
you
all the
think.
way over there? How'd you get the water all the way over there?
Somebody spilt my water.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Chris.
So I think we already talked briefly about this, what our assumption is for yearly pumping levels on the, I think it's page 4. We need to account for anticipated reductions just because the people are conserving because it's costly, and of course, these mandatory things coming down from the state. I think that's where we're really going to need to have Don help us come up with not just a target, but, a rationale for the target. And I know he's been a little uncomfortable in previous meetings to put a stake in the ground about outside use because we don't know what the outside use is today.
That's the variable that nobody knows, so.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing I can think of is, that we target, if we look at what our reductions have been, maybe it's reasonable to some that outside portion of a person's water use is also going to go down by a similar percentage. Maybe a starting point, but we need something because we need to define what the new tier 1 width is going to be. And we don't have that information at the moment.
Right.
Well, I'm sure that the rate study is going to need to have a rationale. Now, I mean, how good that rationale is based upon how much we know about what's going on, and clearly we don't know about inflation. We don't know how much the public is going to reduce pumping because of the replenishment fee, but we know it's been dropping for the last year, although we also know it can only drop so far. The other issue is the state is going to demand that we drop some more. Now, whether or not that's consistent with what it's already being, dropped, it's not going to be a totally subjective or objective. It's going to be subjective. We just got to make sure that the rationale is clear, and not everybody's going to agree with it. I mean, they just aren't, But
But we've got to pick something.
but we can't tell Mark to do something and then try to make him justify why he did something.
Erring on the side of being able to back away from the number that we establish, right? But we have it high enough so that we've covered the eventuality of the worst negative news that we think it's reasonable to grab. I know we haven't seen it yet. I don't know exactly how the state's going to implement these fines, but I know this president's concerned about when we can't prove to the state that we're meeting their guidelines, that these fines that they levy on us are pretty substantial. And we're not budgeting for that either, so it's, I don't know how we could budget for that, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that's going to come out of our emergency
I mean, we
reserve.
can put in $10,000 a day in there for 365 days. but
Exactly.
I don't think that's what we want to do.
No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, I think if the public was aware that that was happening, I think that would be another incentive for them to cut back, right? Because,
Well, I think all that, the $10,000 a day that I've been hearing about, I mean, for LA, I think it's something less than a tenth of what a day would be more than, and I don't think they're going to start enforcing that right off the bat either.
Well, I know when they were going through with the mandatory recycling, they had the $10,000 a day penalty, and they put it aside, said as long as we see you're making improvements and getting to where we want you to
What we
get.
need to do is make sure that our rates are such that we're not giving water away and we're not encouraging people to use more. We're discouraging wasteful water, and we're encouraging conservation. I don't think we need to automatically hit the state guidelines, assuming that the state comes out with real guidelines, the first year. I think that's just asking too much. But we got to start working toward them.
so right now, it's hard for us to appreciate the impact of inflation when it's all bundled together, the labor inflation and the inflation related to the CIP investments and things. Is that something we could ask Mark to just pull out separately so we could see those as?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that would be useful. The multiple rate structure scenarios that we currently have, well, let's see. Stan, speak to that one for me, would you?
Well, one of the things that I would like to see is looking at the fixed versus commodity rates. I mean, that I think is a fairly significant issue that the board will want to look at. that doesn't mean that we can't make a recommendation, but we need to have solid numbers to say what might be reasonable. I believe, based upon Mark's numbers in his report, the ratio is now something like 56 to 44, if you just actually use the numbers out of his report, which it seemed to me that was low because it used to be more like 60-40. And if you look at Mark's numbers, they're currently more like 56 and 44. But I would like to see the trade-off between 50-50, 45-55, and 40-60, so that we have, because we could talk all day long about, what's better, but until you see the actual numbers and the impact on the fixed rates, we can't really do anything. Right now, my feeling is, and has been for the last 5 years, that the fixed rate is too high. We do have to be careful about making too big a change too quickly, and the higher our total budget gets, the more it hurts the people on fixed income and
The low-end users of the
yeah,
water.
the low-end users. All the data I've got indicates that we need to do something. Now, what, I don't know. But again, I think what we need to do is start moving in the direction of lower fixed, higher commodity, but we don't want to make too big a jump at once. But we have to have the numbers. So that is one trade that I'd like to see that we could take back to the board. Another one we should consider and like to have everybody's input on, what is the top of tier 2? And right now, basically what we have is the top of tier 2 is the sum of the indoor use, and the outdoor use, throwing in a little bit of surplus for the swamp coolers. And obviously the tier 2, the outdoor use is going to dramatically come down, although the state's not been all that responsive in saying, how far. They keep talking about efficiency ratios and all this stuff that mean absolutely nothing to me until we get it down to gallons per day per household or gallons per day per person. It doesn't make any sense to me. And it's not going to make any sense to the board members. So we got to get it down to something reasonable. One of the things that I was thinking, and this is just an option, I'm not trying to propose it, is that I believe the current indoor is like 7 units per month, with an additional 2 units for the swamp coolers, bringing it up to 9. And then, okay, what's the state going to allow for the outdoor? Well, my feeling is that the maximum is going to be the same amount that we have for indoor, which is about 7. So if you add the 7 on to 9, you get 16, which is a far cry from the 24 that we've got now. 24 is equivalent to 208 gallons per day per person. So if you compare that with a current 55, and I guess I would suggest that we ignore the 42 for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
That might happen, but I think that's the subject for a different rate study.
Well, even if you do the 55 with the average household in Ridgecrest, I think that lowers you down from 7 to 5 units per month, 0 to 5 instead of 0 to 7.
Yeah, well, whatever, I guess, what we need is a rationale, and obviously Mark should be involved. Because again, we don't want to surprise him. We don't want him to tell us how to run our agency. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we use him as a sounding board. But if we assume that the indoor is, oh, by the way, I was assuming 2.84 people per household. That number came from Chuck Krieger. Not having any other information, I'm sort of assuming he's right, but that puts the number down slightly below 7 at 55 gallons per. And then swamp coolers, not everybody has swamp coolers, and obviously we don't use swamp coolers only 6 months a year, but those months that they are used, they are used. So again, that would bring it to 9, and then optimistically, again, if outdoor use is equivalent to indoor use, which I think is optimistic, it's not going to be greater than 16. But what we need is a rationale that we can support, and we certainly want Mark to be involved. And he may have numbers from other cities and other water districts that he's using. He may have contacts with the Department of Water Resources that we don't have, where they've actually, behind closed doors, been talking about numbers. But these efficiency ratios they're talking about right now don't mean anything to me.
And some of the, as I understand it, the tier 2 estimating that was done before about what tier 2 would be entitled to was based on, or partly based on, a lot size of 17,000 square feet.
Yes.
And what's the actual average lot size in Ridgecrest?
Oh,
Do you have a number?
the R1 lots are 6.5 thousand, and R1 lots are probably 80% of all the lots. So
there's
if you look at
maybe some room there.
median rather than a mean, it's probably in the 6.5 to 7,000. But that's history at this point in time.
But if they were using the 17,000 square feet and had some assumption about how much of that was landscaped to come up with
And
the current.
I think they did mention efficiency ratios in there.
Yeah, to come up with the current tier 2, there looks
Yeah.
like there's room for tier 2 to shrink.
And tier 3, I believe, was based upon backyard water consumption or something like that. And the state,
Backyard turf.
and the state doesn't care, I don't think, about that anymore. They're going to give us a estimate for outdoor, I think, I'm assuming, and I may be totally wrong, because frankly, I keep asking Don what's going on with regard to, SB 606 and AB 1668.
And
No one knows.
He's been trying to get the information too. Yeah, the state's just not
but Mark-
communicating.
Right.
Mark might have some better information. Yeah.
We can run that by him.
And top of tier 3 was based upon backyard outdoor consumption. Well, in my mind, the top of tier 2 needs to be the whole thing. And I think it's going to be a lot less than the current tier 2. And then that begs the question as to, do we need, what do we use for tier 3? Or do we need a tier 4? I mean, if we don't have a top of tier 3, we can't have tier 4, but we have to have a justification for where would you put the top of tier 3. So all those questions need to be answered, and we need to start getting in, well, not answers. I think what we want are options, if this, then that, what, and see what makes sense. And we certainly want to have Mark's input. And I'm not saying we're going to do what Mark says. I'm saying is we need his input just like we need everybody, including the public, Mike. So if you have a comment, walk up to the podium, and I'm sure you'll be recognized. So I think we probably beat that to death.
All right, that one's done. I think the next one is pretty clear. We don't know what we don't know, and we're going to anticipate some surprises in the future. And perhaps Mark can give us a bogey for hey, if we miss inflation by 10% or 5% or whatever, these are the impacts. And I think some of this is back of the envelope calculations, but I don't want to assume that. So if he has something that would give us a better, where we're kind of going here is, you know, if we mess with the commodity to fixed rate ratios, I know there's been some concerns offered by staff that was a problem 10 years ago. But there's also different situations now where we're more actively engaged. We've got more reserve. We've got more attention to the fact that if your commodity use does drop and your revenue from that does drop, I mean, we can sense that and take action and be watching for it, right? But these inflationary and the lower anticipated water usage things maybe implore us to have a different management strategy into the future as we keep our eye on that so we don't bust the bank in case something happens that we don't anticipate. So it would be helpful if he's got some guidance on, you know, what we might do in terms of appreciating those based on a risk analysis, if that makes sense.
Oh, I guess we didn't, you know, going back to the rate structure scenarios, there's one that I do want to see. It would be good if the staff would give some thought to what other he hit on the top of tier 2 as being a possibility. You know, I mean, we could, and again, we can't commit, Mark, to a lot of this stuff without knowing how difficult some of it is. But looking at like 14, 16, and 18, if we decide even to get, you know, if we decide not to just give a number, you know, what might we do? My feeling is one of the biggest issues, though, is that ratio, and that's the one that we really need to let the board in on, even though we also should be saying this is what the committee recommends. What we don't want to do is tell them that they've got to take this or nothing. It upsets me when I'm told that you can vote for it or against it, but there are no options. So we don't want to do that to my other friends on the board. But it would be nice to look at some other rate structure scenarios if somebody can come up with something that you know, would fit into our timetable, which quite frankly is tight. And I hope you've alerted Mark to the fact that it's tight. And so he knows what's going on.
Okay, let's take a short break and we offered opportunity for public weigh-in at the beginning, and maybe we can open it up for Mike to, introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay, Mike Neal. So just for my own clarity, if we back up to the possible bond amounts here, I was looking at how much that would increase rates in a percentage amount. So, and I started with this, I figured you would do that, it'd be looking at the 9.4 mil. So I looked at your charts and saw that if you get 4.5% 20-year loan, that's going to be about $700,000 a year payment. Now I figured I looked at the operating budget, $12 million for basically operating budget. So that would be a 5.8% increase. Does that sound right? Or do I need to include the capital improvement project budget also? Just the operating budget?
No, you'd have to include the capital improvement.
So if I include that, what that is, that bumps it up another, I don't know, it's 9 or
Mike,
10.
on page 2 of that thing that I gave you,
Yes.
I looked at 4.3% specifically, and a 20-year term bond would be $701,000 per year, and a 30-year would be $558.
Yes.
And if we were really lucky, and somehow we're fortunate enough to get into the state revolving fund, those two numbers for 20-year and 30-year would be 600,000 and 451,000,
Yeah, sounds about right.
which is a significant decrease from what was in the original finance report.
I guess the point there is just it kind of verifies that if we go with funding these expenses in a bond, that we're not going to have 10% increase next year. I mean, we may not even have to have much of an increase. If we're looking at a 5.8 to 6% increase, are we gonna exclude the normal 3% bump up in the budget and as not being part of this? Or this
We've
is
already
above and beyond?
bumped up this fiscal year on July 1, we had a 3% increase.
Right.
So if we were to do a 10% increase come 1 January, that would be actually a total of 13%.
Right.
And so, well, that's of course why we hired consultant. I'm hoping that it will be less, but I don't want to tie Mark's hands either.
I would mention, Mike, that, Mark is the guy that we're going to rely on, so be careful about doing back of the envelope things. I think it might be a little bit more complicated than that. But the bond issue our thinking is the bond issue should be more favorable to the public or to our customer base and should not be as expensive as pay-as-you-go. But there's still factors like employment, inflation, and other inflationary effects that are happening in there that aren't included in the calculation you just quickly put
Exactly.
together, so.
I don't know how you estimate inflation, so
But
hats
your
off to somebody.
wish is right in line with mine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we're all hoping that this is going to significantly reduce, but, the devil's in the details, so we really need to let Mark have some time to go through and figure out what's happening before we
Right.
commit to a number, because we don't have one.
Now, as to the possible use of an SRF loan, one question popped up in my mind was, we've been talking about that, it takes a while to get your hands on. Can we bond it for these projects and then get an SRF loan and pay off the bond and go with the loan, or is that not how it works?
No.
That was my question last week as well.
Okay.
And unfortunately,
I can't see the state paying off our loan for us. I mean, it just,
Does that mean?
I don't think it's going to happen. That's why we need to get on board with investigating the opportunities early. So if everything lines up, we can transfer from the bond to the state revolving. But we got a budget for worst case. I mean, we need that capital improvement, so we got to budget enough money to see that it's done.
Well, my practice of 30 years more plus on the base was to always think out of the box. That's what they wanted me to do. It's what I tried to do. As far as this now, is it absolutely, you cannot get an SRF loan after you bonded projects and pay off the bond and use the SRF loan? Do we know that for sure?
So-
Has that ever been explored?
So, once you start spending money on the project, and if you're using bond proceeds to spend that money on the project, you cannot get reimbursed through an SRF. If the project hasn't been done yet,
Okay.
even if you took out 9.5 million in a bond, you got approval from SRF for a project, and then you could proceed with the SRF funds and you'd have that extra bond proceeds to, I don't know,
So
you'd
the
have to.
possible strategy would maybe start on, you're not going to start on all of them at once anyway, right? You're going to start
Well,
one and then another one.
Right,
and
right.
You might be able to actually put some off and fund them with SRF loans, get lower rates. And
Right, but you'd already be bonded for the 9.5 million, so I don't,
so,
that,
okay. Well, just thinking. So I guess it looks very promising and then I don't know how you could even not figure that if you go bond it out and get a loan to fund this, that's not over 20 years instead of a much shorter time frame. It's obviously not, you're not going to be shelling out.
Mike, could you speak
I'm
directly
sorry.
into the mic, please?
If you get like I said, a 20-year loan, that's clearly gonna be less monthly yearly cost than paying it all out of your pocket to,
Oh,
you know,
sure.
what they call
Sure.
pay as you go. So that's bound to make it more palatable to the ratepayers. And, you know, like I said, I'd be surprised if it'd be more than a 5 or 6% rate increase. And, you know, think people are not gonna scream and yell about that. I think, you know, as soon as you throw 10% out per year, that you're gonna get pushed back, big time, I think, especially with everything else that's been pushed on people, so.
Yeah, I think all
bonding
the
is a
board
very good
members would
idea.
agree with you.
Yeah, that's why we're going this way, Mike. And it's,
Yeah.
the thing I would, again, caution, though, is that as optimistic as I am, and I think Stan is, that this is the right way to go forward. We really don't know. It's early at this point to come up with an accurate estimate of what we think the rate increases are going to be. So
Yeah.
I would hold back trying to give the public enthusiasm. I mean, other than the fact that we do believe in the deep in my heart, I do believe that this is going to be more affordable than the pay-as-you-go cash option that we were presented.
I have no doubt
before.
about that. The other thing about just the rates, and we had to talk about the tiers, setting the tiers and so forth. Now, one of my thoughts, and I'll just throw this out here, in order to make the water service for lower income people, lower water use people, a lot less expensive, and make the whole rate structure a lot more understandable, I think, and seem to be more common sense to almost everybody, is to just say, well, we're not gonna have tiers, we're just gonna charge you X amount of dollars per 100 cubic feet of water you use. So if you don't use much water at all, then you're not gonna pay much of anything. If you use a lot of water and just be a straight line, you know, so many dollars per 100 cubic feet, and that, you know, that's easy enough for the consultant to figure out how to throw that kind of a rate structure in and get the revenue that you need. And, you know, any way you do about, you go about it, you gotta worry about people cutting back on water use and cutting back your income. But, you know, this would be something that people would, I think, would look a lot more attractive to members of the public, to just say, hey, my water costs me whatever, you know, let's say $3 a 100 cubic foot. And then they could figure out what they want. You know, when you talk about the tiers and they worry about it, well, look at this, and it jumps up in tiers, and it jumps way up to tier 2, way up to tier 3. Some people, can be a little confusing and they just basically are always going to revert back to, I just need to use, you know, as little water as I can. And then they wait and see where they fall into the rate structure, because you can't predict it. You know, what's going to happen to you in the summer. And like me, I try to cut it back. I don't want to go into tier 3 because that's real costly. But, you know, I don't know how to make that happen. I just cut it back. And I mean, like right now, my backyard's suffering because I've refused to water as much as I did in years past, because it gets, you know, I got $160 a month water bill right now. So try to stay out of that. But if you just had a straight line rate structure, charge people a fixed rate per 100 cubic feet, that could be calculated, figured out, and it might be a lot more palatable to the general public.
That's partly included in the discussion that we had about fixed versus commodity price ratios, and getting
Right.
down to right now, instead of a 60% commodity, 60% fixed versus 40% commodity, flipping that over to a 40% fixed versus 60%
Right.
commodity
Yeah.
might be a way for us to start looking at giving answers to us and the public about, you know, where are the benefits and the risks associated with those.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, I heard that discussion, I saw you talk about inching towards it, and my suggestion was we just go all the way with it and eliminate the fixed charges, just take them out and just say, we figured out how to fund ourselves with, you know, a fixed charge per 100 cubic feet, and you worry about how much water you use and how much you're gonna pay, you know? So, just an idea.
Something to think about. Thank you, Mr. Neal. Okay, I think we're on the page called Actions. Did I miss anything?
No, I believe you're right.
Okay.
You're on a roll.
We are on a
Well,
roll.
slow roll.
We are on a slow roll. But we've talked about some of these things, like when I look on the next page for decisions, and we've talked about the need to consider tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 things. I think we're actually a little higher than, or a little further along than we realize.
Oh, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of repetition here.
So we talked about SRF, and I know Don reached out to Krieger and Stewart, and we got a response back from Chuck that apparently there has been some experience with SRF. I wish Don was here to help us address this, but, perhaps, and I think it was Chuck himself who said that he had some experience with SRF, so maybe that's a way, a low cost or a rapid way that we can engage a consultant on SRF issues and ways forward. Because we would like to get something started such that by the time we decide to make a bond and decide on a specific bond that we have, it'd be awesome to have an option. And I know you guys have cautioned us saying that, disadvantaged communities are the principal target for this, but there's still money on the table at the end, so I don't know how long a shot it is, but we won't know unless we actually engage, and I think that's the desire here is to carry it as far as we can to see, maybe, because that 2% difference or more.
Right, and staff agrees with that. It was more of, if we're doing the rate study, we need to just plan for the worst, and we're still gonna try to get the SRF funding.
Awesome, that's great to hear.
So this item doesn't pertain directly to the rate study per se, because
Right.
we have to look at the worst case for the rate study. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we need to procrastinate to start looking at what those issues are until after we pass the rate study. Because no matter what happens, we're going to have to somehow bond in the future, and the sooner we understand the ins and outs of what's permissible and what's not permissible regarding the state revolving fund. If you look at the new general plan we've got, something is needed for emergency operation. That I think would go pretty well with the state revolving fund. When we get to those projects, say we're going to optimize something for something, and there's all the other cities that are just trying to hold their head above water, trying to work emergency issues, that's probably not going to go real good. And I'm sure there are buzzwords that, you use when you really want the loan. So we just need to get, informed, but we don't want to wait. We want to start and have a running start on, with a little luck, the first loan be state revolving fund. But, right now it's a toss-up. We have no idea.
So as we look at number 2 and, the chart that we have regarding the priority of the projects that Krieger and Stewart provided us, we need some assurances that those numbers that are on there actually include all the costs for each of those projects. When does that normally happen? And is that something we need to know? It seems to me we might need to know that before we go into the rate study, because we're assuming 9.4 million, right? So.
Right, I believe our last conversation with Krieger and Stewart was they were gonna refine those numbers with more accurate costs with everything involved.
Okay.
Well, and the date to which we go out to bond, we need to have, that will impact how quickly we need to increase our rates to get to the debt service. So it does, and of course, any pre-loan activity needs to be done by then too. So we don't want to say we're going to go out and bond in January of FY24 if we're not going to have the preliminary work done and be shovel ready until a year later. Yeah, I mean, just the obvious stuff.
I'm assuming that we've got enough track history in the past that we could look at, what surprises there were and maybe use that as a bogey to start with. If it's 10% or I don't know. I know not everything's possible to estimate that way, but we just want to make sure we got enough money to do what we're doing.
Right.
And if
Everything's an estimate. I mean, let's face it, until you actually paid it off, it's an estimate. So just do the best, but we got to have a number. We have to have a number and we have to have a date to give Mark, because otherwise he's he's gonna come back and ask for a number and a date.
Okay, we talked about item number 4. I guess we're hoping that Don can, we know it's an estimate, but we just need to have some rationale for the estimating, how we got there, that we can share with the public. And as well as number 5 is we're estimating water pumped in the future, which we've already had some data that the pumping is going down, right? I mean, recently I'm trying to remember, was it 300 acre feet or some number like that Don offered?
It's been going down. The running 1 year average has been going down for the last year.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to believe that it won't go down more, except for the fact that it can only go so down so far. I mean, realistically. On the other hand, we don't want to get caught short like we were before, where people started conserving and we almost went bankrupt. We want to make sure that we anticipate that the pumping is not going to be any more than, or any less than something, because we don't want to put in a number and then 2 years from now forced to go through another rate study.
It's just a matter of keeping track of the change in slope as it goes down.
Right.
'Cause
Pardon?
keeping track of the change in the slope as it starts to, because it's going to start leveling off, so.
Oh,
At some point, sure.
Yeah.
well, eventually, my feeling is it's going to keep going down at the same rate until it will asymptotically go to some number. And if we have a crystal ball and you could tell us what that number is, because right now it's not slowing down according to the curves that, using the data that Don's given us.
I've got a magic 8-ball, we can try that.
There you go.
Hey, whatever it takes.
That's
Bottom
2 out
line
of
is we
3.
have to have a number and we have to have a rationale how we got the number. It's not going to be right. We know it is. We know right now that any number we use, it won't be right. It's just got to be the best number we can come up with.
Yeah, and explainable, yeah. It
Yeah,
needs to be something.
how we
can
came up with
explain.
it. Yeah.
Number 6, we had some discussion on this during the board meeting, and personally, I have a preference, but I can't push my preference, but it'd be interesting to compare two options for replenishment fee collection have been presented, and one is one not levy the replenishment fee on tier 1 at all, and increasingly level it on tier 2 and tier 3. So tier 2 would get a third, and then tier 3 would get 2/3 of the replenishment fee collection, is one idea. The other idea is to spread that out kind of like a peanut butter spread, that everybody pays a third, increasingly. So tier 3 would be paying more, than tier 1, but tier 1 would be making a contribution as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the first option you recommended would pass the 218 muster.
Okay.
Well, what about
But-
putting half? I mean, anything that goes on tier 2 automatically goes on tier 3.
Correct.
Right, so you put half on tier 2, and then another half on tier 3. That way they're additive, and I think they do support.
Right, but I think that's too arbitrary. I think there has to be some sort of logic and reason behind it. One that I suggested earlier was you treat it as a second source of water. And so then it may be that it only hits those that would actually be above
That's
our natural recharge.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I like your thinking, Ty, and there's no, it's not deterministic at this moment, right? It's something we can think about options, but, the reality is if tier 1 is meant for health and safety, and if everybody in the valley only used tier 1, we wouldn't need imported water and we wouldn't need a replenishment fee. So it's one of those things that's like, so why are they having to pay replenishment fee?
So,
Yeah,
but
it's-
we'll of course run this by Mark. He may have other recommendations.
Yeah,
or
please
ideas.
do.
and all we need is what we want is the options, so that we can talk about them openly in front of the public and let the public have an input, and all the staff have an input.
Yes, and take.
And now Jim Worth was supposed to talk to Mark about that, and We have no idea what the
So
conversation was.
we did submit the question to Jim to make sure what we were proposing was legal and allowable under 218 and such. He hasn't gotten back with us an official statement.
Mark maybe did talk to him and might have some ideas. So if they, but I go along with what you said. That does seem logical and reasonable.
Yeah, so bring on the options. And we don't need thousands, right? There's probably one or two options that would make sense, and it'd be just something that could be considered by the board. And the impact on the rates, right? Because the tier rates will be affected, I assume, by that decision. On the last chart, and then hopefully we can be done by 3:30. I'm not trying to drag this on too long, but I think we've talked about the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 discussion, understanding what goes into those so we can come up with a new approach. Mark's given us some assumptions on inflation rate, 10% on the labor inflation rate, I think was it 888 or 885 or?
Right, and that was based on the index that is mentioned in the memorandum of understanding with the employees.
And that's just for the salary part, right?
Right.
Yeah,
The others,
we're
we're
not-
looking at industry and trying
Yeah.
to figure out how much it has increased over the last year.
And materials and,
We're not trying to change anything that Mark has said. We just want to make sure that it's clear, written down, and everybody understands what the assumptions are. So if people want to throw darts at the assumptions, they can, up until the time we decide that's what we're going with.
Got it.
But we want to make clear what the assumptions are.
I'm not sure that,
And we'd like them to be semi-accurate.
well, that would be, well, we'll give it as our best
Yeah.
educated
Well,
guess.
Mark's our best guesser right now. I mean, my feeling, what else have we got?
Any other comments? I think we've talked about most of the other things on the decision page. Stan, do you see something else that you want to underscore?
No, but our next meeting, though, we do need to tie down
Yeah.
the scenarios. And we've given them one for sure that we want to take back to the board.
Right.
Some other ones we can do internally within our committee. And if we have universal agreement, then, that's good. We don't have to take that to the board necessarily. But if we have additional scenarios that we think might have sensitivity to the board, we probably want to show those. I'm not in favor of the staff or a committee telling the board that this is it. I think we pretty much got feedback from the board on the pay-as-you-go plan the last time, and I don't want to see that again. I want to, even though I think they've given us a lot of authority, we don't want to abuse it. So we want to establish those scenarios at our next meeting.
Yeah, so having said that, I'm going to talk with Lauren after this. This time next week would be good. I mean, I'm hoping to have another meeting, and then, of course, then we'll have our regularly scheduled finance meeting the following week, at which point Mark ought to be already out there and running with guidance that we've given him so we can report out to board the following week. I need your help a little bit. You've been through this a few times, so we've got a 45-day review period for the public at some point. This president has requested that we be ready to put the new rates into place in January of this upcoming year.
Does that mean did we vote on them in December?
Yeah.
The last time to implement them in January, or did we vote on them in January to implement them in January?
So last time we approved going out for a Prop 218 in October, which gave us the 45 days for the December to vote to implement the rates that were effective January 1st.
I think that answers one of the questions that you were posing. But
I did hear some of the
That might-
directors
that
say
might
that
make
they
it
didn't want to
tighter.
rush it either, so.
Yeah, there's that going on. And so we've got a little bit of a pressure from the president. And I'm sure he doesn't want us to do something stupid in that timeline. We want to do due diligence as best we can. And if there's a reason that we can't start collecting, I don't know, till February or March, I don't know what the restrictions are there. Assume,
It's, you know, we can give the scenarios to Mark and he can, because it may change a little bit how those rates reflect based on when you want to start them.
now basically in October, and we can have a special meeting in October if we have to, because 45 days doesn't gel with our month-to-month meetings. But it seems to me that the October meetings is the one that we have to establish the, you know, if we give them options, that we're gonna pick an option to go forward with on the Prop 218 hearings, so that all the numbers associated with the hearing, which includes all the detailed rates,
Right.
can be in the hearing
In December.
announcement or whatever they call it.
In the 218 notice, yes.
Notice. Thank you. I knew there was a word.
so back to my encompassing question. I know we got a lot of stuff to do. And I'm trying to figure out
So if you
when
want,
do we have to have these different things done to
Right.
meet the goal that the president has set to us? And is it even reasonable?
so if you want a January 1st for the first rate increase, we would have to have something, we'd have to choose a scenario at the October board meeting or at least 45 days before the December board meeting if you had a special one.
Or we could actually have a special meeting in December, although, you know, December's a bad month to have a special meeting with Christmas, you know, right after
Right.
Thanksgiving and before Christmas. So it doesn't necessarily have to be as a matter of fact, it can't, both meetings, you can't have both meetings 45 days apart. I mean, the two meetings 45 days apart. So it seems to me one meeting or the other may have
Yeah.
to be a special meeting.
You'd have to have more than 45 days as well because we'd have to get, once you approve the scenario or the rate structure to use, then we have to do the background, all the information, the notice, we have to secure the addresses and stuff and who to send it to from the two different counties, and then we have to mail everything out. So we would need, yeah, you're looking at 2 months really,
Okay.
rather than the 40. So 60 days rather, that gives us 2 weeks to get everything prepared and mailed out.
Yeah, we could be asking some of staff to be working some of those early things, right? Because the address easer is not going to change
Some of it,
between now and
yeah,
then.
some of it we can start working on beforehand.
All right, I'll leave that to Don to decide, you know, when to engage and direct staff to take actions. So, okay, well, thank you for that. That helps clarify things. It looks like, so it's kind of like the Dumb and Dumber when Jim Carrey's asking that gal for a date. And she says, never in a million years. And he says, so you're saying there's a chance? Yeah, okay. So,
Oh.
so if we were to, sorry for that. So for another ambitious goal, what are the likelihood of the topics that we discussed today, us being able to sit down and have a discussion with Mark next week to give him what we're thinking? Is that something that, are we asking too much for you guys to?
No, I think maybe if instead of a Tuesday, you look at Thursday.
I
Just
can
give us a
shoot for
couple
Thursday.
extra days
All
to
right.
get it all squared away for next week.
All right, why don't we shoot for Thursday next week? Is
Okay.
that okay
Yeah.
with you, Director?
I'm retired, yeah.
So we'll shoot for,
Yeah, if Thursday can be productive, I'm all for waiting the 2 extra days.
Yeah.
Because we need to have, again, for all those questions, we need options, and anything we can tie, the sooner we can tie it down, that reduces the scope of the work for Mark. And right now, you know, he's probably pulling his hair out unless he's like Jason here, you know. Yeah, right. So, yeah, I'll be happy to go along with Thursday.
My feeling is that'll work out. Thank you for that. So Thursday, Friday is even an option as well, but I don't know if that's Flex Friday or,
It is a Flex Friday.
all right, so we'll shoot for Thursday, and that'll give us 3 days to drink and be merry afterwards. And will you take action to make sure Mark is able to dial in? And does 2 o'clock, is that a good time for you guys typically, or? Right,
And if Mark's not available, get back to us right away so we can modulate whatever we need to modulate, because we need, we definitely need his input, you know. Be nice to have him physically, not physically attend, but on,
He should be able to call in.
on call in, yeah. Because again, we don't want to surprise him anymore when we want him to surprise us.
I'll let Lauren know that she's setting up the announcement to double check with you that time works, and then we'll plan to meet next Thursday, 2 o'clock. Awesome. So we'll call the meeting at 25 after 3. Thank you for your patience and indulgence and inputs, Mr. Public. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have anything else, Mike? Okay. All right. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.